Hello everyone, I'm Danil Tuseyev, the producer of the Il-2 Shturmovik flight sims. I'm here at the studio with Viktor, our historical consultant and the mission designer for the project. Today, on the eve of 2024, on behalf of the entire dev team, we would like to share our results for the past year and our plans for the upcoming year. Hello everyone! For the Il-2 world, the past year has been full of events and processes. Working on two projects at the same time required the utmost focus and effort. The plans for 2023 were quite ambitious and involved serious risks, so we are proud to say that those plans were fully implemented and stayed on schedule. Speaking of the development of the world of Il-2 Great Battles, the amount of changes and updates has been considerable over the past year. There are no small ones among them, and I would like to name and describe each and every one in detail. But that would take too long, so we'll talk about the changes as a part of the larger picture. At the start of the year, Flying Circus Volume 2 had been released, which included 10 airplanes and the preliminary versions of the Western Front Spring 1918 map and Pilot Korea. But we didn't abandon the World War I setting, nor did we slow our pace. Exactly. And so, on New Year's Eve, Flying Circus Volume 3 has been released, with 8 more planes and the final version of the Western Front 1917-1918 map. This new version boasts better quality, more detail, and additional features. It now offers several seasons. There were fewer seasons in Rise of Flight, while the first volume of Flying Circus only had 1. It also allows the players to put together a full-scale pilot career over several years. Additionally, this map features new objects, like military camps, more detailed railroad stations, and the front line filled with debris and stones. Altogether, this improves the visual perception. Over the last year, we completed development on 7 new collector planes. I have used the phrase completed development rather than developed because it takes over a year to complete the development of each plane, and the process is complicated and multifaceted. Speaking of which, there's a video on our channel where our lead engineer, Roman Kovalenko, describes the creation of the physical model of a plane. The same goes for the development of the technical requirements for the plane, making the 3D model, sound recording, and content creation, i.e. missions, campaigns, and the career. Today, we will list the planes completed and released in the past year, starting with the Spitfire 14E bubble top. Basically, this plane was designed based on the Spitfire 14, which had been released earlier in the Battle of Rhine. The modifications include the teardrop-style canopy, which gives the pilot a 360-degree view, the extra fuel tank behind the pilot, and a photo camera compartment. The thing is, the end of the war left few aerial targets for Allied planes, so these were mostly used for tactical reconnaissance. So the players can fit the planes with a camera for photographic reconnaissance. Another new plane is the Soviet fighter, the Series 38 La-5F. It is the third La-5 we have released, but this one has a new visual model for the cockpit, made at a whole new level. Yeah, unlike the previous models, the cockpit in this one is fitted with a teardrop-style canopy for better view with an emergency release, meaning you can remove its cover. As for the cockpit itself, the pneumatic trigger has been replaced with an electric one. This plane has a standard M82F motor, effectively making it the final model of the La-5 series. The third plane is the Li-2, a large cargo aircraft and night bomber. It was the Soviet version of the Douglas DC-3. The Li-2 aircraft was manufactured in the Soviet Union through a licensing agreement. It was called the PS-84 and meant for transport purposes. Eventually, when the war began, they had these planes fitted with armaments for the needs of the front, for example, a dorsal turret. Initially, they were armed with rifle-caliber machine guns, later replaced with UBT heavy machine guns. The aircraft also carried a Shkas bow gun. The planes were also fitted with outer beams along the center section to give them the ability to carry bombs. In September 1942, the PS-84 was renamed to the Li-2. In our project, this aircraft looks as it did in October of 1942. The next one is the American cargo glider, the CG-4A. It was a new type of aircraft for our project, for which a whole bunch of new technologies were created. Having one object towing another in a complex game world is a challenging task, especially if it involves planes moving at high speeds. It is interesting to note that we keep coming up with versatile technologies for a wide range of applications. In this case, the technology originally developed for aerostats is now being repurposed for trucks towing trailers and for cargo gliders. The glider was designed to improve the capabilities of cargo planes. It could hold about 14 raiders along with some cargo, a jeep or a cannon. The glider was carried by another aircraft, for instance, the C-47, which we have in our project. So, they would deliver the glider to the infiltration area and unhitch it to land on its own. It had a tilting cockpit for unloading the cargo. The glider itself was simple. It had a welded framework and wooden wings. If you were lucky enough not to lose it during the landing, you could use it again. Speaking of which, picking up gliders from the ground was a practice that we might implement in the future. They erected 2 masts with a rope between them, and the carrier plane would hook the glider like a fish out of the water. There, some curious facts for you. Landing a glider was no easy task. Over 2,000 gliders had been delivered to England, of which only a few hundred participated in the Normandy landings. Others were damaged in training or left on reserve. The next plane is the Messerschmitt Bf-109 G6AS, the German high-altitude fighter. Roughly speaking, the G6AS was not exactly an improved version of the G6, the most widespread German G6A fighter, but rather a modification of it. In fact, it was that same G6 fitted with a DB605 motor and the larger DB603 supercharger, which significantly increased the aircraft's critical altitude. So it was a kind of high-altitude interceptor that served as the Reich's air defense for the most part. Another modification was the MW50 engine power development system, otherwise known as the primer, which gave an advantage at low altitudes. This modification is available in the game. Also, the larger supercharger required the cowling to be redesigned for a more streamlined shape. The standard G6 had 2 unsightly nubs on the cowling in front of the cockpit. The new modification resembled later aircraft, such as the G10 and the K4, featuring a nice, streamlined cowling. And next comes the Romanian ER-80 fighter, specifically its short version. We're not yet done with this aircraft, since purchasing the ER-80 in IL-2 grants the player both the short and long versions. The other version is currently in development and will be completed soon. Our original plan was to create a 2-in-1 plane with a basic aircraft that players could modify with various options to alter its appearance, which is our usual practice. In this case, we ended up with 2 separate planes. With the Spitfires, we were able to make a short wing modification. The long version of the ER, however, not only has a larger wingspan, but also a longer engine mount due to its engine being longer. All this affected the aircraft's center of gravity, so we decided to create 2 separate planes. The short version will come out first. The long one is still under development. This plane carries 6 turrets and was in something like the 106th series. Romanian planes were essentially craftwork, and planes in the same series could vary widely. The players can further modify this short version, one of the options being a bomb at the center with a bomb release cradle. same as with the Junkers 87, which converts it into an R-81. The purpose of the bomb cradle was to allow for bomb delivery in a dive. It moved the bomb away from the propeller to avoid the bomb damaging the propeller. The players will also get the ability to mount heavy machine guns, converting the aircraft into an ER-80B model. Also, around the spring of 1944, they started to arm the old model with German MG-151 cannons because the 6-rifle caliber machine guns weren't performing well. In 1944, some 36 planes were modified this way by the Romanians. Now, this aircraft turned out quite appealing, being something of an average between the Yak-1 and the E-16. It came out really beautiful, with its visual model created by Ivan Shirshov, a 3D modeler who works with us. Hi, Vanya. You are familiar with his skills from such planes as the Ilya Muromets and the Sikorsky S-16. In this case, he took on a more complicated task, which tells us that the guy is working to improve his skills. The aircraft came out nice. Skipping a little bit ahead, I can tell you that he's now working on the E-153 Chaika model. Let's go back to 30 years before World War II. This year, we released the Siemens Schuckert SSW D4 and the Sopwith Snipe, which appeared at the end of World War I and were the peak of engineering at the time. These were essentially late-war aircraft. The SSW D4 hit the front around September 1918 and was developed from the earlier D3 model. The D4 featured a longer wingspan and a narrower airfoil cord to improve its altitude performance, since it often served as an interceptor for air defense purposes. Thanks to the rotary motor, it didn't require warm-up and had a high rate of climb. It also had a distinctive design. Its motor had the cylinder assembly and the propeller rotate in one direction and the piston block in the other to compensate for the torque. Just think of it, they created such a complex engine back in 1918. They could have hit the front much earlier if not for their complex and advanced motor. It was typical for the Germans to start a global war and run out of resources, and they ended up using synthetic motor oil. Initially, castor oil was used for the rotary motors since it was a better fit. So, the Germans experienced some problems with this engine, namely a short lifetime. However, D4s were supplied to limited units, and highly skilled pilots were assigned to them, which allowed the aircraft to prove itself on the front. Well, as for its opponent, the Sopwith Snipe, it was essentially an upgraded Sopwith Camel, a Camel on steroids if you like. It was fitted with a more powerful engine, increasing its power from 130 horsepower to 230 horsepower. Its weight was also increased, making the aircraft less maneuverable, which caused many pilots to dislike it. But they could reach higher speeds, which allowed them to seize the initiative in battle. Not only are we working to improve the fleet, but also the gameplay. Over the course of the year, we have developed and released 5 new historical campaigns for the single-player mode covering all sorts of events. The Wings over Cayenne campaign was created for a later version of the Map of Normandy. The Wings over Cayenne campaign was created for a later version of the Map of Normandy, which reflects the period after the Allied landings, roughly as of late June, when the British had built a bunch of advanced airfields at the bridgehead. This campaign is about Squadron 245 Typhoons, the British ground attack plane. In this campaign, they take off from those advanced airfields for assaults and air support, which describes the Battle of Cayenne. The Overlord campaign is also based on a later version of the Map of Normandy. It tells the story of the first group of planes converted to the new Mustang P-51B, giving them the name of the Pioneer Mustang Group. The players have to provide support, patrol, etc. The Sky Nomads campaign is part of the Battle of Kuban. It takes place on the Eastern Front with the player assigned to the 265th ER and the flying Yak-7B during the spring of 1943 in the full swing of the Battle of Kuban. Against all odds is meant for the Western Front map during the times of World War I, where the players can fly the SSW-D4 we were talking about earlier. This campaign is free for those who own this aircraft and any Flying Circus module. The Wild Mustangs campaign is based on the Rhineland map and comes free for all Bodenplatte owners. The players fly the Mustang P-51D during March 1945, i.e. at the final stage of the war. While creating new scenario campaigns, we are also upgrading the existing ones. During the development of the game world of The Great Battles, we introduced some new features, like code numbers. We also added new machines to the existing campaigns. Blazing Steppe, Ice Ring, His Majesty Griffins, Hawks over the Bulge, Steel Fury, Sea Dragons, 10 Days of Autumn, Achtung Spitfire, and the tank campaigns Last Chance and Breaking Point. Also, we've released those campaigns that were not previously available on the Steam platform. Apart from that, over the last year, we have created 11 single missions for all planes in the Battle of Normandy. And for the pilot career mode, we've added 12 new mission types, along with their subtypes. We work to improve the existing pilot career, and these new mission types are basically universal. Over the last year, we have introduced photographic reconnaissance for the Arado plane, famous for being the first German aircraft to photograph the Allies' infiltration area in Normandy, this being one of the mission subtypes. Another aircraft that has received the photographic reconnaissance capability is the Spitfire 14E, mentioned earlier. This one has its camera facing to the side, which requires the pilot to fly close to the ground and, in most cases, circle the target. Another feature is artillery spotting, which also comes in several types. For the regular front line, you can use it on any map. In Normandy, however, we have dedicated squadrons that perform artillery spotting to direct the fire from ships. So, let's say you have some coastal fortifications. The player takes off in England, approaches the continent, and directs the fire from ships. We added a new feature called visual reconnaissance, which requires the players to fly over the front line and visually compare the types of targets on their way. Marking all the targets completes the mission, provided that all the marked targets match. We recently introduced a couple of assault missions where the players have to provide support for offensive and defensive armies. These two are separate mission types because the first requires the players to support the advancing Allied army, while the second is all about dealing maximum damage to the advancing enemy units. We also added combat patrol, initially available only on the Western Front. Now you have it on the Eastern Front as well. Flights guided by observation posts are now available, with the ground spotter flagging the targets to attack. Spotlights were added for most night missions. Additionally, the players now have to identify themselves when coming back to home turf, which can be done using flares. The cargo convoy system has been improved and updated. These missions are now carried out during the Market Garden operation and on D-Day in Normandy on the Rhineland map, with C-47 planes delivering supplies to the troops surrounded by the enemy in Bastogne. The players can fly both the convoy planes and the C-47 cargo aircraft, transporting paratroopers, dropping containers, and even gliders. I counted 82 improvements to the aircraft physics. 10 to the AI, 10 to controllable tanks, and 41 to other systems. However, progress is not just a matter of game development and adding new content. It's also important to consider the growth of the team and enhancing its capabilities. Over the last year, 13 new developers have joined the IL-2 team, an expansion not seen since the start of the project. Among them are 2 mission designers from the community whom you might know, Nikita Volgin and Albert Zverev, which is a good thing. We now also have a historical consultant helping me with both ground vehicles and characters, as we now have too many different objects and need an extra pair of hands. Additionally, we now have a technical game designer who will implement new objects into the game world and configure them. During the first half of the year, new employees were being trained. However, they were already able to produce the new types of missions we mentioned earlier on their own. So they're capable of thinking through the task and implementing it into the game. We also have 2 new programmers and 2 flight model engineers. Both programming and engineering units have improved their capabilities to an extent that IL-2 has never had before. It didn't take long to see positive results either, but we'll talk about it later. Other specialists who joined us over the last year include the interface designer, environment designer, sound designer, and 3D plane models designer. It should be noted that this is the first time we have different people for 2 of these positions. Previously, these tasks were assigned to others, which distracted them from their main profile. Now, we have dedicated specialists doing effects, interface, and sound. Each of them can focus on their respective tasks, improving their performance in both quantity and quality. We also have a new community manager who has been part of the community for a long time and helped us before, specifically with the pilot career mode. Thanks to the growth of 1CGS Studio, we could call in another 10 people from other units to help us develop and support IL-2, which further improved our production capabilities. At the beginning of last year, we provided extensive retraining to all our 3D artists. With the new project, it's crucial not only to develop new technologies, but also to use them correctly in creating 3D graphics. Among other things, we have drastically increased our cooperation with subcontractors. All of this has resulted in the production scale of the IL-2 project growing by more than 2 times over the last year. Now let's talk about our plans for great battles in 2024. In the Nordic country of Finland, a group of modders have been working on the map of Karelia for quite a long time. They've gotten pretty far with their work. The map is already under alpha testing, and the Finnish guys expect to complete the first phase around spring. For our part, once that happens, we will do our best to add quick missions as well as pilot career for that map. Considering the new planes on the way, such as the E-153 Chaika, this map will be a great fit. The map is highly promising. They've created a complete setting with ground objects where the villages differ from those in the European part by their distinctive Nordic architecture. In later phases, there are plans to introduce Leningrad. Because the landscape is different, having swamps and dense forests, it has different ground textures and so on. We expect the first phase to be released in spring, and later the map will be further improved with new objects, like the above-mentioned Leningrad, just like it was with the development of the Western Front of 1918. But there are enthusiasts not only in the north. The south has no lack of them either. Another map is being developed by a group of enthusiasts, and their work is nearly done too. This map is dedicated to the military action during the defense of Odessa in 1941 and its liberation in 1944. Our preliminary goal is to release this map before the end of 2024, having completed it with the quick mission and pilot career modes. The unique feature of this map will be the replication of the large port city, Odessa, as well as the long and distinctive coastline. It's nice that the missions related to naval objects and Eastern Front objectives will now be available not only in Kuban, but on this new map as well. We also plan to release a new collector plane, the German Ta-152 fighter. We currently have the F-190 Dora, which was historically designed as a temporary aircraft before the Ta-152. This plane has a powerful 213E motor. And in our project, we plan to add a new feature, nitrogen oxide injection. Car race fans will know it as nitro, which will significantly increase the engine's critical altitude. The modification we're working on is the H1. There was also the H0, but since our resources are still limited, we decided on a more advanced one, whose distinctive feature were its much longer wings, allowing it to maintain good maneuverability at high altitudes. It will carry an Mk108 cannon mounted between the cylinder banks of the engine, as well as the two synchronized cannons at the wing root. In the future, we plan to keep designing all sorts of planes for great battles in cooperation with various partners. In 2024, we would like very much to start the development of Soviet fighters from the late period, the Yak-3 and the La-7. We'll probably implement the late version of the U-87 D5 Stuka. So these are our wishes for now, but we'll try our hardest to make them real. After all, it's all in our hands now. The 2022 changes have given us freedom in action and decision-making, which means both new opportunities for our team that we didn't have before and new responsibilities. We're doing everything in our power to use them as best we can. So we're going to tell you where we are with our new project. We're not yet ready to reveal the historical context. However, we can talk about what we've been doing over the last year and a half. Most importantly, we're on schedule, and it won't be very long before the new project can be released. Using our experience and learning from mistakes, both ours and those of our competitors, we were able to organize our work in such a way that, despite a whole lot of new features, development has proceeded steadily, smoothly, and extensively. Setting clear goals at the very beginning of the project and moving towards these goals in a smooth and dedicated manner was the foundation of our new strategy. The major change in the new project will be switching to an up-to-date graphics pipeline, the so-called physical-based rendering, PBR. It's not just a good physical model, or just a damaged model that makes flight sims feel real, but also the fidelity of the visual perception. The object lighting model is what helps you bring visual patterns to a new level while retaining good performance and optimization. An artist who works with textures uses such concepts as object texture analysis in reality, color, geometry, reflective power, and metallicity, all of which allow them to render the textured surfaces of various game objects as faithfully as possible. In our new project, apart from changing the 3D model production technology, we also intend to improve the detail quality, mainly for plane interiors and damaged models. The 3D models in general will be much more detailed compared to our previous work. This goes for all types of objects: planes, ground vehicles, armament, characters, buildings, and foliage. Speaking of the damage model, we plan to bring this one to a completely new level. In our previous projects, we gave it a good start with airframe strain, bullet trajectories inside of objects, and high explosive incendiary impact on components. So the damage model was quite elaborate. Now we intend to elaborate on it even further by introducing components of the engine and control system, the plane's power system, the airframe's loading carrying elements, and so on. We also plan to split the airframe into separate parts that can be damaged. In combination with previously created dynamic visual damage technology, this will produce a remarkably versatile damage model. For our new project, we've already created a whole new ambient lightning model that uses ray tracing principles. It's an extremely difficult task, and not everyone in the industry who has tried to find a solution has succeeded. The eye's ability to dynamically adjust depending on light, the so-called visual accommodation, is very similar to the dynamic change of HDR brightness in computer graphics. Yet the perception of these effects is very different. Your monitor is not able to produce the same luminous power as the sun when you look at it with the naked eye. We put a lot of time and effort into it, and we have come up with a complicated but applicable solution that is going to be a part of the know-how for our new project. This technology allows the volume of the atmosphere to be illuminated, creating a sense of air volume, distance, and the size of the game world. In general, this makes the image on the monitor as realistic as possible at any given moment. And it is this sense of reality that helps you immerse into the virtual world, making you feel like you're part of whatever is happening on screen. The surrounding objects, like trees, vast facilities, for instance airfields, etc., play an important role in visualizing the environment. With airfields, we have agreed that rather than being perfectly flat, they should be uneven. They will follow the terrain's profile, making it challenging for the players to take off and land. We're also working on night illumination for airfields and towns. The tree visualization technology is undergoing significant improvements, and the concepts for tree model creation have been redeveloped nearly from scratch. We are making efforts to improve transportation routes, roads, and railroads. For the first time, our game is getting tunnels that will not just be there for decorative purposes, but also act as in-game objects that vehicles can actually drive through. At the same time, the visual effects have been significantly improved, with all major effects created anew. We gave careful attention to the player's view during the ground target assaults. Damage mechanics and visual effects for the ground vehicles have been brought to a completely new level. A system for ground vehicle physical behavior when taking all sorts of damage has been created, together with a set of corresponding visual effects. Of course, the plane effects have also received a brand new design. We're saving the talk about most of our new project updates for future conversations. These include changes to both the planes and ground vehicles, making the single-mode air flights much more massive, and introducing new radio communication and sound associated with the transition to a more advanced version of the FMOD API. The new audio engine, new design of the graphic interface, and the interface itself will also run on the new API. You should also expect new game modes, a new approach to training the players to pilot planes, and new principles for getting familiar with the game world. This map is being created in an extremely interesting, diverse, and in some sense even romantic setting. Well, as romantic as anything that has to do with war and its realistic reenactment can be. So we will discuss that and many other things next time.